Hi, welcome to the Week 4 Forum. This week we go out of sequence on text chapters and address chapter 15, which was written by my colleagues, Drs. Steve Housel and Carolyn Taylor, on the subject of state and local government. This chapter raises the important fact that a lot of governing goes on at the state level and at the local level. States have a constitutional mandate to look after the health, safety, and moral education of their citizens. Most often, when citizens interact with government officials, they are interacting with state and local officials. An important issue for understanding government at the state and local level is the idea of a tax regime, which probably requires a little bit of explanation. The term refers to the mix of taxes that state and local governments use to raise revenue. And most states have have some difficulty fully funding the government, and most states, I believe all of the states, have constitutional requirements that require a balanced budget. The problem Oklahoma confronts is that the Oklahoma legislature created a tax regime that has been systematically incapable of drawing sufficient revenue to fund its operations. And as a result, over a 10-year time frame, they have systematically underfunded key state operations. For example, common education and higher education combined comprise roughly 48% of Oklahoma's annual budget. Some would say that the reasons for these budget shortfalls is volatility in the oil and gas industry, which has been historically low due to global oversupply. Others would say the reason is the state legislature deliberately chose to create a business-friendly tax regime in the hopes of creating more business activity, and that meant cutting the top marginal income tax rates, and likewise cutting corporate tax rates at the state level significantly, especially for elements of the oil and gas industry, in particular the slant drillers, which is to say the folks in the oil and gas industry engaging in fracking. Their gross production taxes are significantly lower than other states like North Dakota, where they're doing a lot of the same kind of activity. Regardless, the price has been, again, significant underfunding of the public sector, which includes education, healthcare, and a number of other important state agencies, especially, for example, the prison system, which is chronically underfunded. The teachers' walkout last spring in Oklahoma highlight the fact that decisions by state governments can have a tremendous impact on people's day-to-day lives. The walkout didn't just impact teachers; it impacted parents and children who returned to class just in time to face state-mandated testing. It affects custodial staff who are even more poorly compensated than the teachers, and so on. I would also note that the walkout didn't happen overnight. Teachers just didn't suddenly wake up on April the 2nd and decide to protest. The walkout was a culmination of a series of decisions by the state legislature to ignore the pleas of teachers to return funding to the schools, not just in the form of higher pay. Teachers are not just selfish, or they're not frankly selfish, but also funding so that schools could go back to 5-day weeks and repair crumbling buildings. These cuts were choices, and those choices created enormous challenges for teachers, but also for healthcare workers, for prison guards, and for everyone else that works in the public sector in Oklahoma. As I mentioned in the overview, local government is very complicated because there are a number of different varieties of local government, and local government's responsibilities vary considerably. For rural communities, county governments play a big role in road construction and maintenance. Municipal governments vary widely in the size of the communities they serve and the way the local governments are organized. Obviously, the municipal government and resources available to a city like Oklahoma City is very different from from a small municipal government like Foyle or Inola. Another important part of the fiscal picture for municipal governments is that unlike other states, cities don't get access to property taxes in Oklahoma. Those go entirely to the county governments. That leaves cities entirely reliant on sales taxes to fund their operations. Anyone that knows anything about economics will tell you that sales taxes are an extremely volatile source of revenue. It's the first thing that drives up when the economy goes into recession. Another important issue addressed in this supplement is Dillon's rule, which was first articulated by Judge John Forrest Dillon, who served as both state and federal judge. Dillon's rule essentially declares that all governmental units below the state level are subordinate to state governments. In Dillon's words, municipal governments owe their origin to and derive their powers and rights wholly from the legislature. It breathes into them the breath of life, without which they cannot exist. As it exists, so it may destroy. If it may destroy, it may abridge and control. What are the practical consequences of that rule? I mean, effectively, state legislatures can dictate what local governments can and cannot do. To illustrate, a few years ago, energy companies were engaging in hydraulic fracturing within the city limits of Stillwater, Oklahoma. The people of Stillwater objected. They didn't want their property values destroyed, and the city subsequently passed a fracking ban within city limits. What happened next? The energy industry went to the Oklahoma legislature and persuaded them to preempt, Stillwater's ordinance and basically pass a state law banning cities from prohibiting fracking. Another issue that's coming to the fore in recent days: some municipal governments that host large numbers of non-citizens have passed ordinances allowing non-citizens to vote in municipal elections. Remember, local governments are effectively, not encompassed by the Constitution. And unless the state legislature bans such an allowance, what's to stop the town of, for example, Hugo, to pass an ordinance allowing everyone living within the city limits of Hugo to vote in local elections? Is that a problem? If so, why? All right. Hopefully I've given you some things to think about, and as you read and study the material, and that will put you in a better position to participate in the forum. As always, if you have any questions, great. The forum is a perfect place to ask questions. Let's have a great week.